Raider Nation, what's up? We are back with Real Talk. I got with me Chris Hansen of Raiders Blog. What's going on, Chris? How you doing, man?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing all right, all things considering. It's been kind of a wild season, to say the least. Raiders have been thoroughly disappointing, I would say. But, just this last game, Christmas Eve, Steelers, I wanted to bring you on, talk about it, commiserate a little bit. What are you seeing from this team?
I think I'm seeing what everybody else is seeing. It's just disappointment all over the field. And if it's not one thing, it's another thing, right? We've talked about the defense. Everybody knows the defensive struggles, and they got the stops. Actually needed it the most. Yeah. So, they allowed that last one, and then when it's not the defense, the offense or the coaching, it's really been a disappointment all the way around, just because it's been so many different things, and it's hard to point at a single thing. It's really just a culmination of different factors.
Yeah, the offensive struggles, obviously, we look at, the Steelers game. Derek Carr had 3 picks. It was probably one of his worst performing games. And unfortunately, where we've seen Carr get better in the fumble department, we've seen the interceptions increase. Now, obviously, some of those are on him, some of those aren't. But at the end of the day, the stat will always show that it's going to be on him. What do you think has caused this? I wouldn't say regression, but what do you think has caused this change in his play?
Yeah, I think that's the mystery to everybody. I think if we knew, or if anybody could point it out, then maybe you would be able to resolve it. But it's hard to put your finger on it, and I don't know what's going on inside the walls there with McDaniels and the rest of that offensive coaching staff, and what they're talking about with Derek. But most of his interceptions, frankly, are just him missing throws. It's not like he's going the wrong place with the ball. Typically, he's going in the right place with it. He's just making a bad decision and throwing it offline. They're really, I guess, physical errors more than they are mental errors for the most part, right? Every quarterback has a few, but I think mostly that, I think, is the biggest concern is that they're not mental things, because mental things, at least they would be easier to resolve, or that things that he could improve upon. But we're just talking about he's just missing throws. Now, that's not all of his interceptions. Obviously, we saw against the Steelers 2 go off his receiver's hands. Those are unfortunate. Not the best of throws in those conditions, but they hit the receiver in the hands. They got to make that catch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that is obviously always expressed. We talk about that all the time. I knew that at Pop Warner, but it is unfortunate. We see this. We had such high expectations for this team going into the season. You bring in Devontae Adams, you sign Hunter Renfrow to an extension, you sign Max to an extension, Derek gets an extension, Darren Waller gets an extension. All these guys are getting, we're building a team and keeping the nucleus together, and then Waller goes out, Renfrow goes out. The offensive line has struggles. We knew that the offensive line was going to struggle, just given the state of it and the amount of money that the Raiders spent on it. But we talk about the biggest thing to me is these leads. And what are you seeing anything differently than I am in these lead changes that we've seen? What is it now? 8 blown leads that the Raiders have had.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm seeing anything different. Obviously, everybody sees that the offense has really struggled. As soon as they get a decent lead, and it's strange because it's not just any lead. It's like, oh, they have a 3-point lead, it's fine. They get a 10-point lead, 17-point lead, whatever. They get these bigger leads, and then they really start to struggle, and that's mystifying a little bit. I think there's you could go back and look at the games and be like, well, did they start playing different, playing more conservative or less conservative in those situations? And I think they've done both. I think they've done both things. In some cases, they've gotten too conservative. In other cases, they've stayed too aggressive, like I think they did versus the Steelers. In those conditions, especially, they stayed too aggressive. They passed too much in that situation. So I think there's been different things depending on the game. And just as we talked about, where it's been the defense or the offensive line or Derek or receivers or Foster had a bad game against the Steelers. Like, it's been something different every week. And I think that's probably, as a fan, that's probably the biggest concern, because I know Derek gets a lot of the, just move on, and that will solve the things. Well, it won't, because there's so many different areas where the Raiders have struggled, and has been the reason that they've blown leads and not been able to win more ball games than they have. And honestly, given their performance this year, like, even with the blown leads, like, the point differential is not the worst. Like, this team should have more wins than they have. So it's pretty embarrassing. And so, when you have that many different blown leads and so many different reasons for the blown leads, then you don't look at it like, hey, we're one thing away. We can address this one area, and that
Yeah.
was it. No, there's a lot of things that the Raiders have to address.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you hit the nail on the head there. I've seen some reports coming out that, the Raiders are considering making a change at quarterback, potentially sitting Derek for the rest of the remainder of the season. Obviously, he's got, next year, his contract comes into question, right? You have the guaranteed money that comes right after the Super Bowl. You have the guaranteed money that comes if he gets injured. What do you think? What do you think the Raiders' plans are going forward? I mean, just speculating.
Yeah, so I mean, I could speculate on what it was before the season, and then we can talk a little bit about how I think it's changed. So I mean, I think with all the contract extensions that they gave out, including Derek's, it looked like a 2 to 3 year window that they were looking at, with Adams and Carr and Waller and all those guys together. And now we're 1 year into it, and now you're like, okay, what do you do? So I think the plan was always kind of go for a couple of years, try to find your next guy, and then make that transition at that time. Hopefully, when the team is a little bit stronger in other areas, and your rookie wouldn't be out, hung out there to dry. But now you're looking at a accelerated time frame potentially, and so now you have to ask yourself, okay, what do we do? I mean, if they do move on from Derek, they're not exactly ready to just bring in a rookie quarterback and just roll with that. I don't think the team is necessarily ready to be a good place for that. And as we've seen where rookies have been successful, that's just not the plan that you want to go with. So what are they looking at? They're looking at a bridge quarterback. You move on from Derek, we got to bring in somebody that's going to be about Derek's production, maybe for less money, until you kind of find the rookie, and you groom the rookie for the long term. So I think the Raiders right now are probably, since they do have that short window to make a decision on Carr, they're probably thinking, okay, who's going to be available this offseason as that bridge? And so if we do decide to move on from Carr, who are the people that we're going to be able to look at and bring in? So, I think right now they're evaluating that and saying, looking around and saying, who could we bring in? If it's not Derek, then who is it next year? While we have some time to find that rookie quarterback. Now, we can talk a little bit about why I don't necessarily like that plan, but at the end of the day, they have to be at least looking at it and evaluating how they accelerate the schedule now to
Right.
find the next guy. If they've determined that all right, Derek is not performing at the level we need to, especially considering the contract and the guaranteed money they'd have to give him very shortly after the season ends.
Yeah, it's. I think that Derek's agent did a really good job of structuring this contract, because Derek really has control over what happens next. I mean, if they decide to move on from him, he can dictate where he goes. If it's via trade, he can force him to release him, and they take a small cap hit, and then he basically gets to choose where he wants to go, if he wants to go somewhere, or if he decides to just hang up the cleats. I don't know if he does or whatnot, but I think that when you look at McDaniels and you look at what's going to happen, he can't have another year like this. And so the rookie quarterback, I think, is kind of out of the question. And so I think if they do decide to move on, I think that the bridge quarterback is that option. And obviously there's some guys out there, and we look at the question is at or around Derek's potential. Who are some guys that you would think?
Yeah, I think the one that leaps off the page to me is Jacoby Brissett. He played pretty well in Cleveland this year. He's got starting experience. He's got experience with McDaniels. And I think if you piece those pieces together, he performed. His performance this year before they moved on to Watson was about where Derek has performed this year, and that's where people are like, yeah, well, price to performance, that makes sense, right? So if you look at Jacoby Brissett, he could be looking at like, hey, this is my chance to go someplace and start. If the Raiders don't have a clear rookie to bring in, then it'll be his chance, right? He hasn't really gotten that chance anywhere, right? He's always been the playing second fiddle. So McDaniels could look at that. Ziegler could look at that and say, we've got experience with him. He could run our system. He's performed about what Derek has performed, and he's going to be more inexpensive. And so you can look at Jacoby Brissett as one potential option. There's a few other guys out there. I think obviously Geno Smith has been the one that performed the best of the free agent to be quarterbacks out there. I don't know that Geno fits or not, but I also think that the Seahawks are going to try to bring him back. So when you look at these kind of situations or who's out there, there's really not a lot, and that's I think where it gets a little bit more complex with Derek. Like if you do decide, hey, we want to go after a bridge quarterback, you're just not going to have a lot of options, and you ask yourself if that option's out there, because it can get really ugly. Let's just say you move on from Derek and you bring in a bridge QB and you say, hey, we're going to devote those resources to try to improve the team, and your improvements don't go right. Like the defensive talent doesn't get a lot better, and the bridge quarterback maybe doesn't perform quite like you want him to, or less than what Derek was going to perform. And now you're talking about McDaniel is going to be in a really hot seat. And so I think that's why it gets a little bit dicey for McDaniels, is if he's going to make that move. It's going to be tough for him if things don't fall just perfectly, for him to be able to get year three, if we have a repeat kind of performance. So, my gut says maybe you stick with Carr. There's other options. Obviously, his contract is guarantees him up, but they could talk about restructuring, things like that. We haven't even gotten there, but I am certain the Raiders are probably considering some of that as well, which is like, let's keep Derek, or let's consider keeping Derek, but let's approach him about restructuring his deal. Maybe pushes a little bit more out into the future, but less so. That allows him to stay for next year. A little bit more of a prove-it deal, because, I don't think he really wants to go anywhere. He said he doesn't want to play for anybody else. I kind of take him at his word for that. So I think when you look at it like that, maybe there's other options on the table, but there's just it's a complex situation. There's just not a lot of options available.
Yeah, I look at the same way. When looking at the contract, that was one of the things I said is approach him about restructuring the deal. That allows you to kind of move some money outward. Like you said, prove it deal gives them at least gives them that bridge. Somebody who already knows the system. Year two, obviously, we know Derek does do better in the second, third years of the systems. He's been in so many different systems that obviously he's probably got so many different playbooks memorized. But and then that also gives the Raiders the opportunity to look at extending Josh Jacobs. Putting some money towards the offensive line, bringing in a defensive tackle, a cornerback, a safety. It frees up some of that money, and I definitely think that would be a good option for them. The question is, what they want to do, what Derek wants to do, because Derek, like I said, he could pretty much decide it. But I think the restructuring would be a great idea. I think that would probably be the best way to go.
Yeah, and I think for Derek, it probably moves some of that guarantee from what would be year three of his contract, probably moves it into year two. So that way the Raiders are like, hey, we're committed to you this year, but we're trying to clear, the second year of that deal. And the way that works is great. It voids, he can get a void of the remaining years of his deal. So he can go he'll be probably unrestricted at that point. He can go find someplace else if he does prove himself. But if he doesn't or whatever, he could decide to retire and preach like he has said he's interested in doing, or he then controls a lot more, but he gives the Raiders some more flexibility in year three of the deal, because right now that's a lot of that's locked up. So there's options there. I'm sure the Raiders are exploring it, but again, you're talking about a rookie. Do you convince yourself that there's a rookie quarterback coming out of this draft that can start right away? Do you bring a bridge quarterback, and which ones are out there that you like? Or Derek, and you have to evaluate all those different things, and then make the best possible choice for the team. But I think you have to look at more so than recency and Derek a couple of some of his bad games, and he has had a really bad year by his standards, and that's you have to wonder how much of that is Derek and how are the coaches actually grading him versus what we're seeing on the stat sheet.
Absolutely. Pivoting away and looking at, going back to the Steelers game, Josh Jacobs was very vocal after the game, had some very strong things to say. And I think that his frustration really resonated with all Raiders fans. What do you take from Josh's statement? Because I know a lot of people are looking at it as he's not going to be back. He has no intentions of being back, he's taking a shot at the coaches. What was your takeaway from that?
I think his frustration was exactly, you take a step back, you look at what happened, you're like, gosh, we didn't run the ball enough. It was, like 8 degrees, -5 wind chill. You have a lead, and they're not doing anything offensively. Like, why the heck aren't you using Josh Jacobs? And, Jacobs is like, hey, put it on my shoulders. And, when we don't get it done and the Raiders don't get it done, you can't help but question, like, hey, could we have done something differently? So I think he was just frustrated. We could have done something differently to win the game. We didn't do it. And, it's always, and like you said, I think he kind of alluded to, it's always something different. Like if it's over and over again, and he doesn't know what to do about it. So I think that's just frustration leaking out, and hindsight's 2020 there. But at the same time, he's right to question a little bit, like, hey, man, we really messed that up. Like, we could have run the ball and we would have won probably if we had run the ball. They did pop that one run, and Foster got the penalty and brought it back. Like, they were close on a lot of them. I know that the yards per carry and the final stat sheet didn't say it, but like, they were close on breaking a few long runs that just didn't get there. Yeah. And I think he's just frustrated like everybody else, just like the fans. And I'm sure the team is pretty frustrated. They had a lot of expectations too coming in. So they're beyond frustrated as well. And so I think you look at it, I think it's more concerning was McDaniel's, reaction to it was more like, hey, we've got to throw the ball better, was kind of his reaction to it. And, I think Jacobs was more like, why are we throwing? Right. And McDaniel was like, we got to throw better when we're throwing. Well, I think that there's a little bit of a mismatch there with Josh Jacobs and his head coach. And it does make you wonder if that is going to be a long-term thing, if that's going to be a long-term relationship, or if Jacobs, if he gets a better offer, he's going to be gone anyway. But even if all offers are equal, if maybe he moves on, remember, they did decline his 5th-year option. So, obviously the relationship wasn't going well, and he's had a great year, but you have to wonder how much of this is fracturing. I'd be, guessing at the exact relationship between those guys, but from the sounds of it, and just like the misalignment of how they're talking, that happens when things get messy, and then things are messy right now because things aren't going well.
Yeah, and if Josh decides to go elsewhere, that's yet another first-round pick that the Raiders do not retain. I mean, there's Cleveland Farrell, who likely is not going to be on the roster next year. Jonathan Abram, who's already gone. Damon Arnett, the Henry Ruggs. The list goes on and on. The Raiders have failed to draft well in the first round, not just under the tenure of the previous regime, but in previous regimes before that as well. I think the last first rounder. The last first rounder that's been here is Colton. And so, it's frustrating to see as we look towards these next 2 games, and then I'll let you get going. But as we look towards these next 2 games, what do you expect to see from this team? We're facing they're facing the San Francisco 49ers, who are having an incredible season. They have a great defense. They've got Brock Purdy, who's playing out of his mind right now. And then you got the Chiefs, who could likely be sitting their starters in the final game of the season, as they've already clinched. What do you expect to see from the Raiders these last 2 games?
Yeah, I'll say this. I think we'll see a lot of the same from the Raiders, and I don't mean that to mean blown leads necessarily, but this is a team that's been competitive, Saints game aside. They've been competitive in every game. Arguably, some of them shouldn't been competitive games. But we're going to see competitive games, even against the 49ers. Has got a really good, like you said, a really good defense. There's a good team, 2 good teams that they're going to play. And the Chiefs might even have something on the line as far as they might have that 1 seed potentially, although that may be by game time not something that they have. So, but we'll see what they do. So, I think the Raiders they're going to go out there and compete. All these guys do have something to play for, right? Carr is potentially playing for his life, and Jacob's still playing for that contract, and Waller and Renfro have had injury-plagued seasons, and they haven't produced. So I think everybody has something to prove and something to go out there. So I expect this team to stay competitive. I don't think they're going to roll over. And these are good teams that they're going to play. I don't know what the results will be, but I guess my guess would be they'll play those teams pretty tough, like they've played pretty much all season, and we'll just see what happens at the end of the day.
Yeah, the hope is that, hopefully on New Year's the Raiders can go in there and beat the Niners and give Raider fans some hope for the rest of the season, and also give a little bit of bragging rights as, even though the Raiders are still in Vegas, it is still considered the Battle of the Bay.
Yeah, many years ago when the Raiders, those 2-win, 4-win seasons, sometimes the highlight of the year was that preseason game against the 49ers. So, let's consolation, no consolation. Always good to beat the Bay rivals. They're still rivals even if they're not in the same locale anymore.
Absolutely. It's the Raiders Super Bowl this year, it looks like. Chris, I appreciate you coming on. Let everybody know where they can find you so they can give you a follow on Twitter.
Yeah, today it's just pretty much on Twitter on game day, Chris Hansen NFL. Join me there. I like to post insights throughout the week when I have time. I've got 5 kids, Kenny, so I stay busy with football, and but my family is the biggest one. They keep me super busy.
No doubt. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Happy holidays, and let's go Raiders.
Yeah, go Raiders. See you, Kenny.
See ya.